Businesses have international financial reporting standards, and governments have international public sector accounting standards. But the not-for-profit sector has no equivalent. This undermines the consistency and usefulness of financial reports, and ultimately harms the sense of trust and accountability that is so central to its effectiveness. The current system is also inefficient, with duplication of effort for both NPO and funders in meeting multiple and at times conflicting financial requirements. An academic study in 2014 received responses from 179 countries. 72% of respondents agreed that an international standard for NPOs would be useful. So, the IFR for NPO project is answering this call. By engaging a wide range of stakeholders, the new guidance will command support from the accounting community and NPOs, as well as those that fund and regulate them. The guidance is being developed in a technically rigorous three-step process, involving a consultation phase and development of an exposure draft, with final guidance available from early 2025. With the goal that at least 10 countries will use the guidance by 2030, with more to follow. The project has a technical advisory group involving national standard setters from every continent and an official observer from the International Accounting Standards Board. And the practitioner advisory group helps us ensure the guidance will meet users' needs. The founding funders share our vision for this game-changing project. We have the opportunity of a generation. We can increase accountability and transparency while reducing inefficiency in the current system.
Great, so I hope that video has given you a sense of just how important and exciting this project is. Now, one question that often arises when I'm talking to people about this is, which financial reports are we talking about? So which financial reports is this project developing guidance for, which is so important? So NPOs produce many different types of financial reports, and it's really clear, really important to be clear which ones are and are not part of this project. So if we think of all the transactions of an NPO, being entered into the accounting system, which then classifies and summarizes those transactions to produce various reports. Some reports are obviously for internal use by project managers and the like. If an NPO is implementing a donor-funded project, they quite often have to produce special purpose reports specifically for the donors about that project. And then every year, the organization produces its annual audited accounts, which are also known as general purpose financial statements. And all these reports need to come from the same accounting system. So this IFR for NPO project, we're focusing on the general purpose financial statements and the accompanying narrative reports. Now, of course, the different types of reports are all connected because they all created from the same source transactions or a set of them. So for that reason, Humentum is also working on other projects to harmonize donor project reporting formats. That's slightly a story for another day, but if we can imagine a world where all donors have got a standardized format for their project reports, and there's a standardized version for our annual year-end accounts, wouldn't our lives be easier? This is part of the pain that has resulted in us wanting to develop this project in the first place. So which stakeholders are being considered for this project? The IFR for NPO project is really responding to challenges expressed by three broad groups of stakeholders. So the first group are the users or the readers of the financial statements. If we think of general purpose financial reports, they aim to meet the needs of a range of different users. So this would include donors, but also regulators, service users, or we could say clients or beneficiaries, as well as banks, collaborating partners, suppliers, staff, and the public. Now, within this sort of group of users, large donors are particularly influential. And obviously, if the requirements of the guidance that we produce conflict with some donor reporting requirements, that will cause more problems for NPOs. And yet donors themselves are really important users of general purpose financial reports. They use it for due diligence and for understanding the organisation as a whole. So for that reason, we are engaging donors in a donor reference group so that we can really listen to their needs and also try and present some of the challenges experienced by NPOs on the ground. That brings me to the second very important group of stakeholders, those who actually prepare financial statements, the non-profit organisations themselves. And for this project, we're really particularly keen to meet the needs of small and medium-sized non-profits. And when we're looking at reporting requirements, we need to balance the benefits to users and the costs to preparers. For example, there might be some information that's of interest to certain users, but difficult for preparers to measure. So we'll be balancing those different needs. Then the third group of stakeholders are auditors who provide assurance about whether the financial statements present a true and fair view. And often auditors are at the front line of supporting NPOs to actually implement and apply applicable accounting standards or guidance. So one thing to just reiterate is that we don't represent any particular group as a project, but we're keen to develop guidance that balances the costs and benefits to all the different stakeholders. So that's kind of where we are as a project. So what is this project actually going to deliver? What changes is it going to bring about? We can see that many of the current problems and challenges expressed by stakeholders stem from this core problem that there is no internationally applicable standard for how NPOs prepare their annual financial statements. Now, in some countries where they do have national standards, and where we don't have national standards, like Uganda, this can lead to inconsistency even within the same country, and I'm sure you've experienced that. It makes it hard for small and medium-sized non-profits to be seen as credible and trusted by funders. They look at the financial statements of potential grantees, and they find it hard to assess the financial capability or to understand the wider context of a particular project. For larger international NPOs, inconsistency between countries also makes consolidation difficult and expensive. So this results in expensive and duplicative processes for due diligence, financial reporting, and auditing. And then the lack of clarity and consistency ultimately reduces the transparency in the sector, and that is what makes funders nervous, especially about double funding fraud, which is harder to spot given the focus on project-based reports. So the solution that this project is providing is internationally applicable guidance for how NPOs should prepare their annual general purpose financial reports. Now, the guidance can exist, but it's really up to a particular country to decide whether or not to adopt it, or to use parts of it or align to it over time. And they can also decide which particular NPOs within their jurisdiction would be required to or allowed to follow it. Then funders can also recognise it as best practice and encourage its use where entities are allowed to adopt it. The future outcomes and benefits are really wide-ranging. So what we see for NPOs applying the guidance, it means they'll be better able to demonstrate their capacity and attract funds, as well as supporting the provision of decision-useful information for governance and management. For funders, it contributes to better and more efficient due diligence, which is a win for NPOs as well. And having clear guidance simplifies and improves the value of audit insurance as well. And I think one of the other really important outcomes from this project, separate from the guidance itself, is the creation of a global community of stakeholders able to engage and collaborate to solve sector-wide issues on financial reporting. And this has never existed before in the non-profit sector, which has been very fragmented. So ultimately, we believe that the guidance will contribute to a more resilient and accountable sector globally that's better able to attract, generate, and use funds for positive good. So that's got to be good. So that's why we're in this project. So who's behind it? You might be interested to know who's actually playing a role in making this happen. So it's being implemented by two organizations in partnership, Humentum and CIPFA. So Humentum is a global non-profit. It convenes NPO professionals and inspires sector-wide change. You may have heard of Mango or Inside NGO that ran a number of training courses in Uganda over many years. Well, those two organizations merged in 2017 to form Humentum. So if you know Inside NGO and Mango, that's Humentum with the same organization. Then the Institute, the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy, is a UK-based professional accountancy organisation with standard-setting roles for local governments and charities, but they also play a really important role as an international convener on public sector accounting issues. So both Humentum and CIPFA are themselves non-profit organisations. Now between us, the project partners are well connected to a range of different stakeholders within the sector that are critical to this project. So we really can say this is a by the sector, for the sector. Seed funding to be able to launch the project has been provided by the Open Society Foundations and the Ford Foundation, but the project isn't fully funded, and to show that we're really global, we're looking for funding from all different parts of the world. We don't want to be or be seen to be US driven or Western or Northern driven. This really is a global project. We have mentioned before of the advisory groups. So we have advisory groups who offer their perspectives and experience on a voluntary basis. The technical advisory group comprises national accounting standard setters from 5 continents. And the practitioner advisory group includes preparers, users, auditors, and academics specializing in non-profits. And we're deliberately and proactively seeking to build and maintain diversity in these groups. You can find information about all the members on the project website, and all the meetings that they have are recorded and are fully available on the website as well. There's nothing secret. We're just trying to make sure we get a really wide range of voices as we develop the materials. You'll see on the tag, Technical Advisory Group, in the top right there, you can see Chris Twagirimana, who is representing East Africa on the Technical Advisory Group. And on the PAG, you can see towards the bottom right, Kenneth Makanga, who is not representing Uganda, but has actually been selected by the Forum of Firms to represent the audit sector, along with 2 other auditors on the PAG. So we can see we're really trying our very hardest to get good global representation and across a range of stakeholders. So we've looked at the who's behind the project. We've looked at what the project is going to achieve. So now let's have a look at the how and when by looking at the phases and the timelines. So the project is being implemented in 3 phases that uses a similar but sort of speeded up process for all international accounting standards. So phase 1 is the consultation phase. And the output is a consultation paper, which is going to be issued in January 2021. We've been developing this over the last many months with detailed input from the TAG and PAG. And it presents questions for structured input from stakeholders. And we're going to talk much more about this later on after our small group discussion. Now, the second phase is the development phase, where we analyze feedback from that consultation and use it as an evidence base to develop draft guidance, which is then exposed for comment. So it's called an exposure draft. And rather than being very open and just presenting options, the exposure draft is now going to be the narrowing down on this is what we propose the guidance should contain. And that's also open then for consultation and feedback. the third phase takes stock of that feedback from the exposure draft and puts through the final changes before launching the final guidance, which is expected in early 2025. Now, it sounds very slow, doesn't it? But this is actually really fast for developing international accounting standards. And the reason it takes so long is because of all the consultation and global input. If we just had a couple of people sitting in an office somewhere writing it by themselves, it could be very fast. But we wouldn't have that global buy-in, we wouldn't have that global perspective, which wouldn't make it useful. So that's why it's taking longer. As you say, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. So we want to go far. Now, what we can see is that when the guidance is finally ready, that's actually the beginning, if you like. The benefits of having this guidance will really only be felt after it's widely adopted and used. So that's why there'll be training materials produced towards the end. And we'll be looking for support for different countries to transition after they've said that it's allowable in their different countries. We mentioned in the video that the goal is to have 10 countries by 2030. I hope it will be many more than that and many faster, but I'm assured by my other colleagues in SITFA that looking at IPSAS, for example, how long it's taken IPSAS to get going, and even the uptake of IFRS initially, it's slow at the start. So we'll aim for 10, but I'm secretly hoping for more like 30, and that we get the ball rolling with many countries. So this need to have buy-in from different stakeholders around the country. That's why there are two aspects to the IFR for NPO project design. So one aspect is the technical rigor applied to the guidance development process, which is led by SITFA. They're specialists in that. Then the other aspect is the stakeholder engagement, which is being led by Humentum. So we're actively reaching out to regulators, to national professional accountancy organizations, to donors, to NPOs, to participate in this development process so that when it's finished, they're ready and willing to adopt it. They feel like they've had a stake in it, their views are heard. So how are we doing in terms of outreach? I love this slide. So this shows the engagement. Actually, some of these figures are for July. The blue countries show where people have signed up and registered their interest in the project. And those people who've signed up include a really broad range of stakeholders, including both international and local NPOs, their auditors, accountancy bodies, regulators, donors, and others. So we're really tracking specifically. Every time you sign up to the newsletter, you'll see it asks you, well, not every time, everybody who does, if you've done it already, you'll notice that it asks you to describe the kind of stakeholder that you are and the kind of view that you represent. And we keep track of that. So we've got a really nice range at the moment, and we keep a strong eye on that so that we're not getting too skewed in one direction or another. We're also keeping a close eye on the regional representation, and again, that's fairly good, pretty good from Africa, from Europe, but a bit lower from Latin America and Asia, the two areas that we're looking to really focus and build engagement there. Now on this map, the yellow flags are the tag members who represent national standard setters. So these are countries that mostly already have their own national standards for non-profits, but they're all slightly different from each other. And they're ready and willing to contribute to something where there's some consistency. It might mean changing their own national standard over time, but they want to contribute to something that rather than increased differences over time, we can converge towards a common NPO financial reporting over time. So it's great that those national standard setters are at the table. They're very, very crucial. Then the practitioner advisory group, we can see those are users. They're rooting us in reality. They're going to say to the tag, well, that's nice in theory, but actually on the ground that won't work because X, Y, Z. So the PAG members also really important that we get a nice global range of representation. And then the country champions are the black ones, the black flags here. And as we can see, we're growing and growing. I think we're at 17. I just yesterday signed up somebody from Bangladesh who's not yet on the map. And we're looking to have maybe 50 country champions in total. I am particularly delighted that my institute, ISPAL, has taken on the role of country champion for Uganda. And it's my absolute thrill and pleasure to spend time online with country champions all over the world every week and seeing who are the stakeholders in their country and how can we engage them. It's very, very exciting. So having heard that brief introduction about the project, now's a chance to meet some of the other people here in the room and to share your questions and thoughts in some small groups. We'll be using a Zoom feature called breakout rooms. And once the rooms are launched, you'll see an invitation that says, join a breakout room. It'll be on your screen, join a breakout room. You should click that, and then you'll be taken immediately to a new Zoom meeting room, which will have about 5 to 8 people in it. We'll shortly go over the instructions and questions you should discuss, but I'll also post them in the chat for each breakout room. Now, it will work much better if you're able to have your videos and microphones on for the small group chat. So when you enter that new breakout room, please do turn on your video and your microphone so that you can have a conversation together. If you have any problems, there's a feature called ask the host to join. So I can come and join your group to give you some clarity in case you're confused. And then when there's 3 minutes left, again, I'll broadcast a message to tell you 3 minutes to go. And then with 1 minute left, I'll close those rooms, and then you'll be pulled back into this main meeting together. Okay, so here are the different questions that we'd like you to talk about. So first of all, in your small groups, everyone should just very briefly introduce themselves, maybe 30 seconds, not a whole CV, just so that you know who you're with. And then maybe nominate a spokesperson who, when we come back into the big group, will be able to speak on behalf of your group. And then number 2 is to share any questions or comments that have come to mind from the introductory presentation. Is there anything you'd like clarification about? What are your reactions to it? What do you think? Is this a good thing? Is this too ambitious? What's your reaction? And then each group may choose to discuss either question 3 or question 4. It's up to you to decide, but you probably won't have time to do both. So question 3 is about benefits. What benefits can you see for stakeholders in Uganda? Where you are from your viewpoint in Uganda, how might you as an NPO or a regulator or as an auditor or as a donor, as a bank, how might you benefit from this guidance? Now, if you came early, you would have seen a thought experiment slide up at the beginning, which was trying to imagine what some of the advantages might be of having uniform reporting guidance across the globe. So now is the time to share those ideas if you thought of anything. And then the last question is, what challenges do you see in terms of Uganda's participation and involvement in this project, and how might they be overcome? I know one that's come up a lot is cash and accruals. So if the guidance is accrual-based and donor reports are cash-based, how is that going to be rectified? And I'm sure you'll see other challenges. We'd love to hear from you as people on the ground, what sort of challenges you can foresee in this guidance. So when the time's up, you're automatically brought back to the main meeting. The spokespersons will have a chance to share some of the key ideas. And what we're going to do now is create the breakout rooms. So I'm going to stop sharing, if I can see how to do that. Ah, yes, yeah. And I'm going to create the breakout rooms. Yeah. Okay, so in case anybody has any burning questions or challenges, we're going to meet each other briefly, nominate a person, share your questions or comments about the presentation, and then discuss the benefits and the challenges. Okay, so off you go. Have a nice time. If you're still in the main room with me and you can still see me and hear me, you should be looking out for something on your screen that says join breakout room. And so you need to click on that. If you can't see that, then just speak up or type in the chat and we'll see if we can help you. So those of you who are left in the room with me, if you've got a problem, maybe you can put something in the chat or just unmute yourself and say, so that you can join a small group discussion. Minutes. Kenneth, you've just joined, welcome. Most of the participants have joined small groups where they're discussing the first initial presentation that we had. So I'm going to put you in group 2. They're just introducing themselves, nominating a spokesperson, sharing reactions to the presentation, and thinking about benefits and challenges. So I'm going to pop you in group 2. You just press the button that says join a breakout room, and you'll find some other people there. Is that okay, Kenneth? I'm going to put you in room 2. Super. I think that's everybody back from the rooms. So welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that nice little small group chat. So the way we're going to do the feedback, rather than hearing everything from everybody, I'd love for one or two spokespeople to share a question or a comment that they had in their group, not the benefits and challenges, just a question or a comment. You can turn your video on and unmute yourself to speak. And we'll share some of those. Any that we don't have time can go in the chat. Then we'll move on to the benefits and then the challenges. So let me stop sharing actually, because we don't need that. Mdika has raised his hand. Super. Mdika, Mdika, fire away and tell us some of the questions or comments from your group.
Okay, I guess everybody can hear me. We had a question about we want to know the key areas the standard, the development of the standard will be covering, and what are those ones that can be left out, and then on top of that, we had a question of how will this be done in case different countries which have already their own requirements, how would that be harmonized among the different countries? So the group wanted to hear about those.
Thank you, Mdika. Those are fantastic questions. So first of all, which areas will be covered and which areas will be left out? In the second half of the presentation, after this small group discussion, I'm going to take you into a deeper dive on exactly what questions we'll be asking in the consultation paper, and it will show you some of those issues. For example, how should the financial statements be presented? What should the income statement look like? How should we grant income? Things like that. So I'll show you that in the second half of the presentation. That's a really important question. And then your second question about countries that already have their own standard. So there are about 20 countries in this category. The usual suspects like the US and the UK, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, also Sierra Leone, Colombia, Malaysia, Japan, India. There's quite a few countries, even Georgia. There's quite a few countries that have their own standard. So the reason why we've got the technical advisory group is so that all the people who have their own standard are coming together to create something that they feel they might be able to align towards. You might have some countries saying, well, we'll just remove what we had and we'll plug in the new international guidance. We might have some countries saying, well, over time, we will align, which is a bit like what happens with IFRS right now. So a country like UK has its own national gap, but whenever they make changes, they try and make sure they're moving closer to IFRS rather than further away. Same with FASB in the US. So we might not have an overnight throw out what we have and bring in international standard, but what we should have is an agreed position that's a point for convergence over time, which is much like IFRS. I hope that clarifies your question. It's a really important one, because if all the different countries are doing something different, here in countries like Uganda, we're kind of stuck. If you've got a donor in the US, they want that. If you've got a headquarters in the UK, they want this. And so that this international unification should make that a lot easier. Great question. And
okay.
No comment? You can just raise your hand, or you can just unmute and share your question or comment. Yes, Nicholas.
Samantha. Yes, please. Nicholas Mushaventa from BDO. When breakout session 3 questions, the first one was, will the standards be applicable to all NGOs, as in respect to either whatever it's small or big? Like the way when we refer to these IFRS, we have the full IFRS that are applicable, especially for big companies. Then you already have the IFRS for SMEs to cater for the small entities. So we'd want to know the ones for NPOs, will they be applicable to all, or you will customize for big and small? The second question, well, it relates to the earlier question that has just been asked, but in a different way. In case for international NPOs, if some countries have adopted and others have not, how now, like at a point of consolidation, will actually the standards be applicable when you're consolidating for an international NGO that has different different operations, different jurisdictions, but some countries have adopted and others have not. Then the third question relates to the religious organization. When we talk of NPOs, one of the member would want to know, will the standards be applicable even to religious organizations or not? The last question from our group was the extent or the complexity of the standards for NPOs. Like the way you know the current standards on the full IFRS, some of them are too complex to the extent that most of the accountants find issues, even including the auditors. So we'd want to know, will the standards for NPOs be so simple to the extent that can be understood by everyone, or they are likely to be complex? That's it from our side. Thank you.
Fantastic questions. Thank you, groups. I think you said that was. Let me take them in turn. I'm just going to mute you. Oh, I can't quite see it. There we go. So the first question was, will it be applicable to all? So ultimately, the question of applicability in any particular country, like legal requirement to follow it, will be up to the regulator or the standard setter in the country. So in Uganda, it would be the NGO Bureau taking advice from ISPAO, I'm guessing. You can correct me, ISPAO, when you come on. The way we're writing it, Mark is there, yes, so Mark, if you want to come in at any time, please do. The way we are designing it is with small, medium-sized NGOs or NPOs at front of mind. So it needs to be simple enough, as simple as possible, that a small NPO could apply it. And yet it needs to cover the main transactions and the main types of issues that most NPOs up to medium size would encounter. We're not primarily aiming it at the micro tiny CBOs who've got maybe a cash book and a mango tree or something, you know, that tiny type of CBO is not the primary focus of this. We're trying to make it applicable and relevant to small and medium-sized NPOs. You'll see again in the second half, the part of the answer to that question is what we're proposing as a basis. So we're proposing the basis, the starting point, to be IFRS for SME, which, as you know, is this big, whereas full IFRS is this big. And an IFRS for SME doesn't include some of those more complicated standards within IFRS that are less likely to be applicable to small and medium NPOs. Leases, IFRS 16 on leases, the ones on, you know, financial instruments that are really complicated. So those ones that are less likely to be applicable are already not included in IFRS for SME. So if we start with IFRS for SME as a starting point, but then add on and fill the gaps for the places where IFRS for SME doesn't give us guidance, like grants, for example, that's where we feel that we can have something that can be robust and technically complex enough, and yet simple enough that it won't be too scary or overwhelming for users, because if it's too big and complicated, it won't be adopted. But I'll say more about that in our second half of the presentation. So that's a great question. If some have and some haven't adopted it in different countries, if you're an international INPO, you've got to consolidate, and Uganda has adopted it, but Rwanda hasn't, and the head office in some country or another needs to do consolidation. Well, that will be no worse than the current situation. That will be no worse than where we are right now, with 20 countries that have got something, but they're different to each other, and the vast majority of countries that don't have anything in particular that's specific for NPOs. So yes, that would be a headache, but the goal is to get as much adoption as possible. And that's why we're doing all this stakeholder engagement and outreach right now at the beginning, so that come 2025, we've got a good number of countries signed up. That's a very perceptive question. And then the last one about religious organizations, absolutely. So it's not just NGOs. Some churches, for example, might not be registered as NGOs. They are non-profits, but they're registered as a company limited by guarantee. And there'll be sorts of setups. So chapter 1 of the consultation paper, which I'll come to later, is all about which types of entities is this about. So we'll come to that a bit later. Those are great questions. Thank you so much. I hope that addresses them. Any other questions from any other groups? Any other spokesperson would like to come forward? Thanks, Nicholas. Great.
Hey, how do you do that?
The hand. To raise your hand or the thumbs up. The thumbs up is in reactions. On your control panel, there's reactions. You can put different things. And then to raise your hand is in participants. But you're welcome, Henry and Panga.
Yes. Okay. Samantha, thank you so much for this initiative. In my group, we wanted to clarify something. When we, especially the objectives of the project, when we should be careful. People asked about whether we are talking about harmonizing the different donor requirements vis-a-vis the reporting. Because standards are about, what do you call an income? What do you call an expense at the end of the day? And of course, the other elements of the presentation of these financial statements. So we wanted that to be clear. Are we talking about, working with a vast number of, donors, each bringing, their different requirements in reporting? What are we exactly aiming at, in this project? That should be clear for everybody, because, a donor like, USAID, they will have a requirement for their reporting, but it's not necessarily prescribing, for you to, to prescribe what you call an income, or an expense. So that's the clarity we're seeking, and hopefully, I'm clear.
Great, thank you, Henry. That's such an important question. And for those of you that were with us from the very beginning, one of the first slides I put up immediately after the video was exactly clarifying this point, because Henry, you're absolutely right. It's so easy to think you're talking at cross purposes and talk about financial reporting, and one person is talking about their USAID fund accountability statement, and another person is talking about year-end annual entity-wide audited financial statements. And they're two different things, and we mustn't confuse them. So you're absolutely right. This project is about the annual audited accounts, the general purpose financial statements of the entity as a whole. This project isn't working on aligning donor reporting formats and harmonizing those, but there are 3 other projects that are working on that, which we're closely connecting with. One is the Grand Bargain, which came out of the Humanitarian Summit for 2016. And that's mostly about development and specifically, but they're looking to harmonize their reporting formats. I can send you a link to that. There's a website all about that. There's another project called Money Where It Counts, and the True Cost Project. And those ones are looking specifically about making sure nonprofits can get enough contribution to their indirect costs. But it involves a harmonized approach to the way the donor reports are structured. So those 2 projects, they know about us, we know about them. What we want to make sure is we don't do anything in the IFR for MPO guidance that's going to be directly conflicting with donor requirements. And that's really difficult. But for that reason, we have, for example, on the PAG, on the Practitioner Advisory Group, we have USAID. They're sitting there. They know all about this project. They're very, very supportive. It doesn't mean that they're going to change their reporting rules overnight, but they're very keen to find a way that we can still get harmonization of annual audited accounts in a way that hopefully doesn't conflict with USAID or other donor reports. And that's also why we have the donor reference group, to make sure that we are really having a tight conversation with that. But you're right, it's a big challenge, and it's not one that we underestimate. It's one that we're really conscious of. And I've taken your take-home message. It needs to be really clear from all the messaging and in the documents and on the website which types of reports this project is about. So I've taken that home loud and clear. Thank you so much, Henry. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Samantha.
Thank you, Henry. Is there any question from another group or comment about the presentation so far?
Yes, Samantha, this is Esther from our international.
Welcome.
We had some two key questions. One of them was that we have some NPOs that still use the cash-based accounting. Does this new IFRS for NPO provide for that as well? And how, if at all it doesn't, how shall we support them? Then we also wanted to know if we have like for example, two schools. One is an NPO, then another one is maybe it exists for the government, so it has to report with IPSAS. Is there a way these two reports can be comparable because they are all doing the same work, only that one is an NPO and one is not? Will the two reports be comparable at this point? Yeah, that's what came from my group.
Those are fantastic questions. Thank you, Esther, and your group. So your first question about cash basis. This has been something that's come up again and again in our PAG meetings because PAG members are practitioners on the ground. They absolutely know that many organizations keep their books and report on a cash basis, or maybe a kind of modified cash basis where it's mostly cash, but they do payroll liabilities, or they do track staff advances or whatever, but maybe they're not doing full accrual accounting. And there's this range in the middle, isn't there, between fully only cash, some things on accrual, all the way through to fully accrual, or maybe just a few things on a cash, maybe we don't capitalize our assets or something. So there is this range. And what we're doing as a project is developing a supplementary tool, which Kenneth knows I presented to the Practitioner Advisory Group just last week, and I will be presenting at the ISPAC NPO conference later this month for the first time. It's a tool that helps NPOs understand where they are on that spectrum and make some strategic choices about where they want to be and to negotiate with donors. Frankly speaking, this guidance that we're producing will be accrual-based, but we are looking for feedback in the consultation phase for any particular challenges that will create. The feedback that we get from that will enable us to go to donors especially, and one of the things we'll be advocating for with donors is to allow more flexibility so that an NPO that needs to report on a cash basis and it's appropriate for their size and they don't need any information about assets or liabilities can do so. But rather than impose a pure cash basis on an entity that would benefit from being able to understand its assets and liabilities, we're going to be encouraging the donors to allow more flexibility. So that has been probably the single biggest gnarly issue at the PAG, and we haven't fully resolved it, but we're unpacking it and engaging with it and listening hard, and we're looking forward to some feedback through the global consultation process that will give us really hard evidence for some of the ways forward that we can take that particular challenge. So I don't have a nice, neat, fully baked answer, Esther, but just to acknowledge that we really appreciate that challenge and we're working hard to try and find ways through it. Your second question has just left my brain. Could you repeat it for me again, Esther? Sorry.
If I could help. The second question was about the same institutions, but yes, one is an NPO, then one is not an NPO, reports using IPSAS. How do we compare the two? Okay,
that's also really interesting. So IPSAS obviously it's for local government and government and local government. IPSAS themselves are broadly based on IFRS principles. As the IPSASB develops each IPSAS statement, they start with an IFRS and they modify it. same with this project. We'll be starting with the IFRS. What they don't have in IPSAS is an IPSAS Lite, a sort of mini IPSAS that would apply to small and medium organizations. If there was an IPSAS Lite, if you like, that would be the perfect starting point for our project, because IPSAS really does cover more about non-exchange transactions and public benefit entities, and it just has much more kind of similarity and resonance with our sector. But because there is no currently IPSAS for small and medium, we're proposing to base on IFRS for SME. But as we fill those gaps, we're very likely to be drawing on guidance in IPSAS where relevant. So I think what we hope we would find is that there would be not too great a divergence between similar entities that happen to be reporting under different regimes. However, I don't want to get too ahead of myself. When it comes to the exposure draft and the comments, that I think will be the right time to be able to say, oh my gosh, if we follow this, it's going to mean a difference to IPSAS, and that could be a problem. At the moment, we're a bit too early on to have those kinds of detailed conversations, but the principle is that they shouldn't look too different if they're very similar entities operating on similar accounting principles. So hopefully that won't be too much of a problem. Great. I'm wondering, I'm just looking at the time, and I'm thinking if there are other questions or comments, it would be great to put them in the chat. If you could put a question or a comment in the chat, and then we will be able to respond to those either in the meeting or in a follow-up email. I'd like to move on now to ask if there's anybody who discussed any particular benefits that they can see for stakeholders in Uganda. By the way, I've just been asked, is the call recording going to be shared? Yes, but unfortunately I didn't hit record from the very beginning. I got it halfway through the video. But yes, it is being recorded and we will share it. So is there any group that discussed some of the benefits, and could they share that with us now, or an idea of some of the benefits? I see Stephen is trying to come in, but is having audio issues. Stephen, would you like to share something? Or Tom?
Yes, thank you, Samantha, and thank you, colleagues, for the great questions. I think they are quite enlightening and helping us understand the project better. In terms of benefits, I was in group 1, and we looked at one of the benefits from a regulator kind of perspective. We focused on URA, and we thought that with this kind of reporting, it will help us, it will help URA standardize on the tax exemption requirements, and that will make it easier for even the smaller organizations that are in many times struggle a lot to get those exemptions from URA. So we think that will be really a great benefit. Then the other one, I think you had already hinted on this, is especially in terms of assessments, and we are looking at it from the perspective of, say, a donor. It will be easier to assess an organization's capacity in terms of being able to report on time. It will be able to assess the organization's ability to meet the beneficiaries' needs, especially while comparing the different organizations. Then also, in terms of maximum utilization of funds, it will be easier to tell which is a credible organization to put money to be able to deliver a particular project or target that you're working on. Since you restricted us to 2, we are simply presenting those 2 to allow others also contribute. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Tom. Those are brilliant. So hopefully it will help regulators, which might be easier to distinguish between those NPOs that should have exemption and those that shouldn't. Whereas at the moment, it's quite a difficult process, and I'm sure it's hard for URA to actually do that assessment, along with many other challenges. One of the other things that's more of a potentially a disadvantage is at the moment there's so much flexibility. NPOs kind of choose the accounting treatment they want to minimize tax issues. But that's again because there's lack of clarity and there's so much problem. So I really think that there will be challenges in that area, but it should really help with regulators and tax authorities just to have much more clarity around the organizations that they're awarding exemption to. So that's super. And the other one you mentioned as well, Tom. Thank you so much. Another benefit from another group?
Hi, this is Brenda. I've been putting up my hand. I don't know what the criteria is for someone to come in and speak. So I don't know if it's okay to just go on.
It's fine, you're welcome. I hadn't seen it earlier, sorry. And then after you, Brenda, I'll bring in Emma. Thank you, Brenda, go ahead.
Okay, this is Brenda. I work with Living Goods as a chief accountant, and I'm representing Group 5. So we also looked at the benefits, and we were very appreciative of this initiative because we believe it will actually bring consistency in reporting across the sector, and it will also bring uniformity, which again, we looked at the different stakeholders and seeing how they will benefit from this, saying as NPOs ourselves, it will create room for us to really do benchmarking, which improves on our performance, easy benchmarking if we are all following the same way of reporting. And we also felt that it would also aid in cross-examination of, and also transparency being granted. But on the other hand of the donor world, also for them to get kind of confidence in the work that NPOs do, because it's now generally easy to interpret. And also make it easy where competition for awarding of grants comes in.
Super, fantastic benefits. Thank you.
And the other thing, to avoid some common errors that may happen, since you have clarity on a checklist, then you can avoid, errors and cost saving in a say, and also, prevent fraud and misrepresentation. That was from Group 5. Thank you.
Brilliant. So preventing fraud, making it easier, making it more efficient, more clarity, confidence, transparency, comparability. And those are benefits that we really hope to bring. Thank you, Brenda. And then Emma, would you like to come in? And then we'll move to challenges. Emma, you have your hand up. You're welcome.
Hi. Great. So in Group 8, we discussed the following benefits: ability, and basically we felt that this rose that they're implementing things like income, on a global scale, and this would also enable ease of costs in a similar format. It's workload and probably lead to cost efficiency because you're basically applying the same thing across the board. You probably will need less accounting staff to do that. We also said this would improve the level of reporting from cash basis at least to accruals, because most NGOs are on cash basis, but having a standard would maybe lift up the level of reporting a little bit. And I think that's it for Group 8. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Emma. You were breaking in and out a little bit there. I'd be so grateful if you could pop your comments into the chat as well. We had most of them, but if you could also just type them there, that would be really helpful. I'd love us to move on now, if it's okay, to some of the challenges that were discussed. I can see Maria Chizito. Would you like to come in and share a couple of the challenges that you discussed?
Okay. Whereas we appreciated the benefits, we noted that not all NGOs are NPOs. Some NGOs have a profit-making section to them. So we're wondering if you had thought about that, and if you hadn't thought about that, does that mean organizations with a profit-making arm would have to create 2 reports? That was one of the challenges that we thought of. And then another challenge was, of course, the kind of like obvious ones, the assets, because at the moment, assets are accounted for differently in NGOs. I think we use capital fund to account for fixed assets. So will these assets be accounted for differently? And then another worry we had is that we were thinking about NGOs, the small NGOs, but I think you mentioned that already, that you're not thinking about the really, really tiny NGOs, because we had thought that how are you going to get that tiny NGOs to comply, because many of them don't have accountants. So had you thought about the rollout process also? And we're thinking that the rollout process could probably be or prove to be a challenge. And then another challenge that we thought of was that not all NGOs are structured the same way. So you find a human rights organization is not structured in the same way as maybe a farmer's NGO kind of organization. Have you thought of the different kind of reports that would have to be prepared for the numerous kinds of NGOs? And that is, I think, basically it from Group 4.
Those are really, really important challenges you've raised there. So NGOs that have a non-profit, that have a profit-making element. So what we're producing is, what we're proposing, I should say all of these are proposals, because everything goes out for consultation and there's questions that will come back, and then the direction that the project takes will be influenced by that feedback. So everything I'm mentioning is our sort of current thinking subject to feedback. Let me just clarify that. The guidance that we're proposing to make will be IFRS for SME plus, if you like, with extra bits added on for the non-profit element. For example, even non-profit organizations will have, what are they called? Exchange transactions. So the normal transactions of a non-profit would be covered in that IFRS for SME element, and then the non-exchange elements would be tagged on. So an organization that is a non-profit organization, but also maybe gets contracts and does normal exchange transactions, that would be covered in that. Where you have an entity that has a for-profit element, like it actually distributes profits to shareholders, for example, not just an income generating element, but a for-profit, that probably would be outside the scope of this. And chapter 1, I'll come later on to this. So chapter 1 of the consultation paper is all about which types of entities would this apply to. It could also be useful to a for-profit entity that has some non-exchange transactions. They could look to this guidance for how to treat those specific transactions, even if the guidance as a whole doesn't apply because they're a for-profit. So I just log it as a challenge. You're absolutely right. It's not pure and simple and black and white and straightforward, clear cut. There are these complex organizations that fall in the gaps. And you're right, we'll be looking to find solutions for that. So that's a really important point. Assets and capital funds. So we're so used to capital funds in Uganda, but they don't exist elsewhere in the big wide world. They seem to be only in East Africa. And when I first came to Uganda in 2001, I seem to remember wondering, what is this capital fund? And I couldn't make any sense of it because it's not in any of the standards anywhere. It's just sort of become normal practice. But it isn't something that's globally recognized, documented, or understood. So absolutely, it's going to be really important that this guidance clearly addresses a way to present assets. We can remove them from a donor fund because we've spent their money, and yet also put them on the balance sheet with or without a capital fund element. So that challenge will definitely need to be addressed. You're quite right. The rollout process is going to be a major challenge, absolutely. So, but with one guidance, at least we can produce training materials that are around one thing. It will be easier to get money to produce training materials for it because it's globally adopted. So the more people that adopt it, the more it's easier to generate materials suited for different target audiences and markets. And anybody can come up and produce training materials. I'd like to pass to Mark. Mark, would you like to speak a bit about your thinking around the rollout process down the line in Uganda specifically?
I think a large part of it will depend on what the outcome is eventually. If from what you've described, it's more of an IFRS for SMEs plus guidance to address the NPO sector, then the rollout is a bit easier, because then the standard is already adopted, and work towards developing material, guidance, training, that type of thing for NPOs to achieve compliance. Hopefully, at some point there'll be illustrative financial statements, sample disclosures, and things like that that the different organizations can pick from and quickly adapt to. So I think a large part of how we'll support implementation will come from our participation actually throughout the process, so that then we know exactly what is coming out, and we can tailor our implementation approach based on what's come through out of the project.
Super, thank you so much, CPA Mark. I can see Nicholas has his hand up, but I'd like to request at the moment, we've run 10 minutes over. I'd love to do the second part of the presentation, and there will still be more time for questions at the end. If you do have a challenge, a question, please pop it in the chat so that we've got it there, and we'll have more time for questions later. But I'd love us to move on, if that's okay, with the presentation. So let me see how to do this. Here we are. I think that's it. So what we're going to look at now is the consultation process itself. Just working out how to do this quite right. Get the right slide up. Bear with me. New share. Right, nearly there. Okay, I think that's it. So following on for that small group discussion, I am so excited to hear all these questions and comments and how engaging and how informed our stakeholders are in Uganda. It's just brilliant. So I'd like us to take a bit of a deeper dive into this consultation process. So who should participate and why? What will it actually look like? What is this consultation paper, and how do we, is that right? Can you see? How do we engage in it next year? So the who of who should participate is actually everyone. That's the short answer. Everyone is invited, no one is excluded. We are particularly interested to hear the views of regulators. So those in different countries who have the authority to decide whether to adopt or to align the guidance, so the NGO Bureau and ISPOW, we would be wanting those in the equivalents in every country to share their feedback formally in the consultation process. We're also looking for auditors, especially those of entity-wide financial statements, funders, the finance and grants staff within funders who award grants and set reporting guidance for their grantees, and of course NPOs as preparers. So your sort of senior finance staff, board treasurers, those would be the sorts of people that would be ideal to respond to this. And why? Well, without input from Uganda, the cultural context here may not be reflected. We might just have too much influence from Europe and US and not enough from Africa. We might have too much Asia and not enough Africa. So we've got the opportunity here to share. So it's really important that we use that opportunity to share what's a reality for us on the ground in Uganda. We want to make sure the needs and realities of our stakeholders here are reflected in the proposals that move forward. The challenges that you've shared, for example, you've shared them here in a discussion, but that doesn't formally put them onto the formal feedback process in the consultation. So we need written submissions of those challenges so that they can be formally considered. And you can shape for future generations. If we make something now that works for us in Uganda, that will be a great thing for future generations. So we've got a real opportunity here. And then the last reason to participate in the consultation process is really to build credibility of the project. If we get 1,000 people from 150 countries inputting into this consultation, it gives a really strong evidence base for the drafting. It brings credibility to the project, and ultimately it means more people are likely to adopt it and we'll get more funding to complete it. So there's just very many reasons why we need good quality, good quantity of responses to the consultation. So the consultation paper, as I mentioned, will be issued in January 2021. It's still in the final stages of development, but it will be around 200 pages by the time we're finished in total. You don't have to read all of it, but I want to just unpack for you the sort of structure of it so you can see how to attack it. So after the executive summary, there's a preface which sets out the objectives of the project, explains who should respond and how, and that is really short, essential reading, the preface. Then the bulk of the paper and all of the questions that are asked of consultants, of stakeholders, are in these two main sections, part 1 and part 2, and we'll look at these in more depth shortly. Part 1 looks at some landscape overview level issues, while part 2 takes a close look at a number of specific accounting and reporting issues. Then the supplementary information is provided to give more context, and some annexes with what different countries do and references to existing standards and things for the people who want to get really into the technical side of things. And then there's a glossary, because the same terms are sometimes used to mean different things in different countries. So this isn't a glossary that defines what these words mean, it's a glossary to say how we're using these terms for the purpose of the guidance. So I hope that makes sense. So the following slides are going to take us a bit deeper into part 1 and part 2. So just going to give you an overview of the types of questions and the types of feedback that will be asked of you in the consultation paper. So part 1 is about framework level issues, like how to describe non-profit organizations and who their stakeholders are. It's written in plain English and pitched to be accessible to a really broad audience of stakeholders interested in financial reporting, not just accountants, but anyone else who uses financial reports as well. In each chapter, it presents a proposal and then ends with a request for general matters for comment. So in other words, you're invited to comment on the general level matters presented in each chapter. Then these questions tend to take the form of, do you agree with what we've proposed? If not, why not? So they're open in that you can share your opinions in full, but they're very structured. You can't answer the question without having read the chapter, really, if that makes sense. So part 2 is about these specific accounting issues, like when to recognize grant income, or whether to disclose gifts in kind, or how to measure inventory that has no sales value. It's still written in plain English, but it's pitched to be accessible to a more technical audience who's familiar with accounting concepts and language. And in this section describes the issue first, explains what the issue is, and then ends with a request for specific matters for comment. So in other words, you're being invited to comment on the specific matters presented in the section. And generally the questions take this form, and they present some alternatives. So say, do you agree with the description and the alternatives presented? If not, why not? And which alternative do you prefer and why? So again, it's necessary to have really read the section and the alternatives before you can meaningfully submit your response. But what this does for us as a project is it gives us responses that are structured and can really be easily analyzed for the next stage, which is crucial. So let's have a look at the taste of part 1 and these different chapters. I should mention that these questions are examples of ones that have been considered to date by the technical and practitioner advisory groups, but they're currently being reviewed to help maximize their usefulness and the information. So don't be upset if they look slightly different in the final document, but this is where we're at the moment. So part 1, chapter 1 is all about which organizations would be considered non-profit organizations for the purpose of the guidance, speaking very much to the question we had earlier. The chapter proposes some broad characteristics. I won't tell you what they are, you have to read the chapter when it's issued in January next year, but it proposes 3 broad characteristics and says that if you display each of these broad characteristics, you are an NPO for the purposes of this guidance, and this guidance should be applicable to you. So the chapter is, do you agree? The question is, do you agree with these broad characteristics that we've proposed? If not, why not? Which alternative characteristics would you propose and why? So here, if you're part of one of these complex organizations that's thinking about whether this would apply to you or not, this is exactly the place where you could read this chapter and say, well, that might be nice for these kinds of organizations, but for us, we don't really feel this helps us to understand whether we fit or not. So it's asking for that feedback. So then part 1, chapter 2 is all about external stakeholders or users of NPO financial reports and what their information needs are. Of course, it's totally different from a for-profit where you're looking at investors and shareholders and things like that. We've got different needs here. So it presents a proposal for who the main types of users are and what their needs are. And then it asks, do you agree that their information needs are A, B, C, and D? And here we're proposing they need information about achievement of objectives, economy and efficiency, compliance with restrictions and regulations, and longer term financial health. But we don't have all the answers. Are these the right things? Are there users that are looking for different types of information that we haven't considered? So that's your chance to share your objective, your perspective and insight onto who the users are and what they're looking for. Then part 1, chapter 3 is all about aspects of the guidance itself. It presents some proposals, and one of these is about whether, I mentioned that the guidance is accrual-based. So the question is, do you agree? Or I think we've recently rephrased it. What might be some of the challenges of having accrual-based guidance? And here, obviously, we'll be looking for feedback on conflicts with donor reporting requirements, capacity, all of those things that we know, but it would be great to hear from around the world and get some regional analysis of where those challenges are and things like that. So that chapter is about that. Chapter 4 is all about existing financial frameworks. So firstly, it makes the case that the guidance must draw on an existing framework. It can't just start with a blank piece of paper for various reasons, and it explains why. And then it sets out criteria for evaluating the usefulness of existing frameworks. So IFRS, IPSAS, IFRS for SME, and some of the national frameworks that exist in New Zealand, Australia, UK, US, etc. So there are 3 questions in this chapter, but one of the questions is, do you agree with the criteria that have been used to assess the suitability of different frameworks? So one of the criteria will be its applicability to small and medium-sized entities. Another criteria, it will be about how frequently it's updated and changed, and other criteria. So the question is, have we picked the right criteria? And then another question is, do you agree with the assessments? Do you agree with the scoring that we've given to the existing frameworks, which has been the basis for our proposal in chapter 5. So chapter 5 really puts forward our proposal for how we want to move forward with developing the guidance. We have IFRS for SME as a foundational kind of framework, but then we can draw on full IFRS and IPSAS and jurisdiction level standards as needed. So then one of the key questions is, do you agree with this model? Do you have any concerns about IFRS for SME? What else would you suggest? So I hope that gives you a bit of a snapshot of what part 1, the 5 chapters, looks like. As I say, there's about 2 to 4 questions per chapter. I've just given you a bit of a flavor. And I hope what this makes you feel is that you have strong opinions about these questions, which is great, and we really want to hear from you and everyone else around the world. what your opinions are. So you need to carefully read the relevant chapter, then give a comment or a response to it. And this structured process really results in responses that we can analyze carefully and feed into the next stage, which is the development of the draft guidance. And as I mentioned, we can also analyze responses by stakeholder group and by region, which gives really important information for engagement and reconciliation of where we've got conflicting opinions. We're never going to get something that is perfect for everyone, for every NPO, every stakeholder, every region of the world. So it's always going to be a matter of, you know, cost benefits and compromises and discussions and reconciliations. But having that information will be really important in that process. So that's part one. It's the shortest, it's a short section, it's only got 5 pages. Part two is much longer, and this is the detailed specific accounting issues. Again, this is just what we've discussed so far, and as I say, it's still subject to change. But for example, how should NPO financial statements be presented? What should the name of the income statement be? Should it have something, a different name? What should be included in the narrative reports? How should expenses be classified? How should income be recognized and measured, especially from grants and donations and gifts that are not common in other types of entities? So the answers to these questions are really not obvious, and NPOs in different countries, especially those without guidance, kind of have to make up their own answers on a case-by-case basis, trying to apply principles. And that's why we have so much diversity and lack of consistency. It's not lack of capacity or lack of intelligence or lack of any, it's just there is no one obvious way to interpret accounting principles in an NPO context. And that's really what we're looking to provide this guidance. So we won't go through each of these now, they're much more technical in nature, but we will be having more webinars and resources on the website, doing a deeper dive into each of these issues closer to the time, so that you'll be able to share your views with a clear idea of what's being presented in each case. The other thing I should mention is that the very beginning of part 2 says, these are the issues that we've shortlisted that we think are most top of mind for most small and medium NPOs around the world. But what have we forgotten? What needs addressing on this list? Or what's on this list that just isn't top of mind? So this is why it's a really speeded up process. Normally you do that before you even develop any of the proposals around it. So we're trying to fast track it by putting in alternatives on these shortlisted hot topics, even before we've got full consultation on what the list of hot topics is. So we're trying to do both things at the same time. So we've taken a deep look at the structure and content of the consultation paper, which, as I mentioned, will be issued January next year. And we've looked at who should participate and why. So hopefully by now you're feeling that you would like to share your opinions and perspectives. And the only question is how. So we'll be working to make it as easy as possible for relevant stakeholders to share their views. If you'd like to respond only to the general matters for comment in part 1, like these landscape level issues, that's fine. If you have a strong opinion about recognition grants, but nothing much to say about inventory, that's fine. You can just respond to a specific section in part 2. So we'll structure it on the website so that it's easy to find the bit that you're interested in reporting to. And you'll be able to download different bits of it rather than having to download documents at once. And we'll also be producing lots of video assets to go alongside the different sections so that you can unpack and get a deeper dive onto specific issues. The main way to formally respond will be through the website, and there'll be forms where you can fill in your responses. We'll also accept written responses. And we're also looking to have some more, should we say, interactive roundtable type meetings in the middle of next year. Which I'm sure ISPOW will be looking to host. We might join some countries together, so we might do Uganda, Rwanda, Kenya, Ethiopia, possibly regional roundtable to get some richer feedback maybe, and to encourage people to submit written responses as well. We're looking at as I say, issuing the consultation paper in January, and the likely window for receiving submissions will be July 2021 for part 1, and then September 2021 for part 2. So you have enough time to digest and consider and consult and really give good quality responses if you're able to, that will help us get something that meets our needs. So my one big call to action is please take this opportunity. Use your voice, shape the future of non-profit financial reporting. So I'm going to hand back to Mark. I'm sorry I've run over a bit. So Mark, you'll take it from here.
Thank you, Sam. We're coming to the close of our meeting today. I want to thank everyone for your very active participation, and to thank Sam for very ably introducing us to this new guidance, something we're all looking forward to. So I'll just beg for your indulgence for maybe another 2 or 3 more minutes. We should be going into a question and answer session just now, but I suppose time may not be allowing or permitting at this point. So maybe I'll just pause for a minute. If anyone has a question, if you kindly post it on the chat. We probably won't be able to respond to it at this meeting, but the team will be able to respond back by email to everyone who's participated with some responses to your questions. So if you take the next 2 or 3 minutes to post any questions that you have regarding anything that has been discussed today, we'll be very grateful for that. Second thing is there's a community forum which we invite all of you to join up and participate on. The online forum for the IFR for NPO enables you to interact with like-minded colleagues around the world to discuss all sorts of general topics on the framework, but also to delve deeper into the accounting issues, some of which Sam has already highlighted, and share your insights and experience with everyone else across the world. So we really invite you to join up on the forum. Just go to that to the website and should be able to sign up. Visit the website and subscribe to receive the newsletter. There is a bi-monthly newsletter that keeps you abreast of developments and makes sure that you are invited to every step of the consultation process. Follow the project on social media, like, share, comment on various posts on LinkedIn and Twitter, endorse the project so that we get to see your support and for the development of the framework of the guidance. You'll receive an email with an evaluation, and that email will also have a link to the slide deck that Sam has just taken us through. There'll also be a meeting recording for those of you who joined a little bit late, but also for the rest of your colleagues who are not able to come on, feel free to share that with them so that they can get to participate and listen into what we share today. We'll also collate within this email and summarize the questions and the benefits and challenges that were identified in the different groups, and discuss our next steps for Uganda. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Thank you for coming onto this meeting. We look forward to you participating in the upcoming webinars and various events that lead or that will be part of the consultation process. We hope you found this meeting useful. We hope you've learned a thing or two. If anything pops up in your mind after the meeting has ended, feel free to drop an email to us at the Institute or to Sam. She's just posted her email address on the chat, and we'll take it from there. Thank you very much, and you should be able to receive an email and further updates on the progress of the project. Have a great afternoon. Have a great afternoon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend coming up. Thank you.
Bye.